Table 8, Louisa, thanks.
Hi, our first theme was about going back into the workplace and really encouraging others to take up some of the things that we've been doing this year. And on a practical level, we thought that as trainees in whatever profession, if when you entered the department there was a clear list of things you could become involved with, people who could help, that was set up, that people would be more willing to be engaged, and that as part of that, that we would be happy to be like a cohort of mentors to help other people as they kind of develop. We talked about the need for cultural change, changing the mindsets of the people at work, that was obviously going to take time, that it was probably not very diplomatic to go back into your workplace and try to change everything straight away, and that possibly even trying to change things within your department might be slightly politically insensitive, and that there might be more tactful ways of doing it, maybe do change management in a different area and then use the learning from that to disseminate the information better. And we talked about how that could be very isolating, and again, the need for networks and peer supports. And finally, we talked about the need for effective communication and the acknowledgement that in this year we've probably learned quite a different language to the one we use in our day-to-day jobs, and the awareness that if we're not very careful, and I'm aware that this is a bit controversial in this setting, but there is a danger of clinical leadership being seen as quite a cliquey thing, and becoming a bit of a toxic phrase that turns people off before they even start to understand what it's about. And we talked about maybe using different words like professionalism to engage people from an early stage.
Interesting. Thank you. And just regarding your comment around mentoring, I think when I was speaking earlier about developing the model, there is something about the experience that you've had and how you can influence and support younger clinicians as they come up. And I think, we've got Deb, my colleague from the Emerging Leaders workstream, and I think, the whole coaching and mentoring element of emerging leaders, and getting you involved in that again will help us sustain the development of clinical leadership going forward. So I think it is really valuable. Interesting what you say about the term clinical leadership. It's one of the, when it gets overused, you're right in sort of terms. But I think it's about, very much about that sort of shared responsibility and that sort of shared leadership, and getting people to think less about positional leadership, but more about their responsibility in their sort of everyday role. Thank you for that. That's great. Next table. Paul?
This table talked a lot around many of the things that have come up already, things around ensuring that the networks are either rebuilt or sustained networks throughout. And you've talked there about mentoring and coaching downwards, but this group was also talking about how one gets a mentor or gets a coach in a more senior position, and how one makes that work. On the basis that sometimes if it appears that it's being blocked at every turn, but it's actually how you get through that and ensure that you get that correct level mentoring. And there was something about taking the time to work out or develop the career, whether that's a portfolio career or whether that's a specific career pathway that you want, including clinical input or whatever that input you want into that. So it's about career development.
Okay, I mean, I think access to mentors and our system for accessing mentoring and coaching is sort of still in development, and I think we need to across the service develop a more sophisticated approach that allows people to access them easily, and in terms of developing that sort of sustained approach to coaching and making sure that people are properly supervised. So I think that is important, and it's great that sort of the networking's coming up again. I think the point about career development, and it's almost so, where do people access? I've heard a lot today as well in my conversations. It's sort of like, where do people go to seek information about, if they're interested in a particular career path. And I think one of the things that the NLC has a sort of key role in is almost developing that portal of information, sort of an electronic portal where people can just sort of access lots of information, whether it's on direct leadership interventions, whether it's mentoring, whether it's secondment opportunities. And I think that's, that again is a real ambition of the council to sort of further refine the NLC website to make it sort of, useful, provide the access that people need, but also provide those sort of online tools that people can use that fits in with their sort of clinical role so they can develop at a time that suits them. So thank you, Paul.
Theresa, I think you had some specific thoughts to share around what's happening nationally, so to do with how leadership fellowships are organised. So were you going to share those thoughts and ask for comments? About 5 or 10 minutes? Well,
I mean, I think, we've got the sort of, as Andrew Lansley sort of announced this morning, we've got this sort of 60 fellowships. So we've got, the NLC has sort of got that funding to now distribute. And I think the process for that, we've developed a sort of application and selection process. And what I really wanted, today is really to sort of make sure that we sort of define that methodology for those fellowships in the right way that meets people's needs. And one of the ideas is really about how we can use you and sort of, your fellow colleagues really in terms of delivering some of the interventions or mentoring. And I think that's, it'd be useful to get your ideas on that. And obviously recognising that you've got to balance that with a clinical workload as well. But I think there is something about role modelling that behaviour and sort of getting it through. I've also heard today sort of people's, having had this experience, it's really enlightened them in terms of their own leadership capability, in particular sort of highlighting any gaps and sort of development areas. And people have sort of mentioned about how we needed this earlier on in our career. And I think, it's, another part of my role is developing leadership development opportunities within undergraduate and postgraduate education. So I'm pleased to say that we have got the commitment of all the clinical professional bodies to embed the leadership framework into undergrad education so that when people qualify or graduate, they will absolutely have leadership capability before they get into the workplace. So they're building on rather than starting from scratch. But I think in terms of, I think at the moment, the website will sort of provide additional information around how we're going to run the fellowships over the next sort of few weeks, really, if there's further information required. Okay.
That's great, Theresa. Thank you very much.
Any other comments, or are we going to move on?
Other comments, actually. Let's hear more from the group around next steps.
Just one over here, Jan.
Yeah.
I presume you're asking for more comments about the sort of stuff we were describing just now, rather than comments about what you just said. Well, those of us sitting here at table 9 will be very pleased about the the repetition of the mentoring, because one of the things we decided was it was important to feed back to our sort of various course organisers our experiences of the fellowships, especially regarding supervision and mentoring, and how that can ease the process and make us feel more valuable and productive to our groups. We shared some of the similar themes with regards the position that clinical leadership or the way that is observed by our peers and other people in the organisations, and actually trying to define a role for a leader in your organisation when you get back is very difficult to think about how you're going to interface with clinical practice and change the perception of your colleagues and peers. So that they don't consider you sort of turn your back in some way on your clinical excellence in order to get into leadership. Part of doing that we thought was to, as well as getting involved in the projects that we get involved in, is really seek to push a little bit harder and get them published. I know we're sort of fairly obsessed by publications in this day and age, but it can increase the visibility and validity of what you're doing. So it's a really part of the clinical sort of literature that's out there. And one of the final things was getting a better understanding of the sort of political spheres of influence and the way that clinical practice is organised. So understanding them better so that you can better work within them. And I suppose part of that comes down to networking as well. So knowing people in various organisations so you can ease your path through these difficult areas.